Hi, how are you doing? It's Richard Moore, the founder of Go Be Remarkable, owner of Ignite Growth Consultancy, and the author of the Amazon best-selling book, Remarkable Business Growth. I just want to welcome you to the GBR live show for July. It's a very special show. We've called it The Confident Presenter, and we've got a special guest in Andrea Pacini. Now, these shows are aimed at helping you to grow a remarkable business. A remarkable business is a business that is remarkable at every touch point you have with your customers, with your prospects, and with your leads. But it's also a business that can double revenue every 12 months. It's what I talk about a lot in the book. And the subject of this month's show is all about remarkable presentation and communication. Something that every remarkable business owner that I've met has is the ability to create and communicate a compelling message in meetings, in pitching, in public speaking. All of those are really important to be able to have that confident message that engages your audience. Now, what we've done is invite Andrea on because I don't think there's anyone I've worked with in my career that knows presenting and knows communication like Andrea does. I worked with him on a project of my own, and I was just really impressed over 6 or 7 weeks working with him, the detail he went into. He's helped hundreds of entrepreneurs, business leaders. He's helped TEDx speakers to design and deliver successful presentations while also transforming their presentation skills. He's the head of Ideas on Stage, and he's also the author of his own book, Confident Presenter, which is actually out tomorrow. So perfect timing for us. So without any further ado, let's invite Andrea onto the show. Hi, Andrea. How are you?
Hey, Richard. I'm good. What about you?
Yeah, very good. Really looking forward to this show. So say, having worked with you personally, I know what everyone's going to get at the show. So it's going to be really
Thank
good.
you. Thank you
Before
very
we get into
much.
some of the questions that we've got, just tell people a little bit about yourself, a bit of a potted history about you.
In addition to what you said, so the reason why I'll give you a bit of background. The reason why I'm so passionate about public speaking is because when I was a little kid growing up in Italy, I grew up in a family of very small business owners. My parents have always been running their own very small business together. They still do. And so as a kid, I saw the challenges because raising 4 kids while trying to run a business is not easy. But I also saw their spark, their entrepreneurial mindset, their proactive approach to life.
Yeah.
And so that's why, Richard, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, to run my own thing. Now, I don't know about you, Richard, but for me, in reality, there remained a dream for a long time because before doing what I'm doing now, I tried many things. I started many projects. All of them failed. Definitely, they were not remarkable, but it was useful because in that process, what I realized was that there are so many great ideas that fail not because of the ideas themselves, but just because of the way they are presented.
Yeah,
And that's why then, to cut it short, eventually I became a presentation coach. That's why my mission is to stop great ideas from failing just because of the way they're presented. My mission, Richard, is to help hundreds of thousands of business leaders inspire their audiences, increase their influence, and why not make a positive impact in the world.
Absolutely. And so that's the principle behind Ideas on Stage, is it, to help people improve their communication skills?
Yeah, definitely. We help improve their communication skills with a particular focus on presenting, presentation skills, public speaking, because I think that you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you can't communicate it, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't go anywhere. No, absolutely. And how can people get in touch with you? I know we're going to talk about your book later on. They can connect on LinkedIn, I take it. I'll share your LinkedIn here. If you want to get in touch with Andrea, then by all means on LinkedIn. Any other ways that people can get in touch with you?
The main, and thanks for doing that. The main social media platform that I use is definitely LinkedIn, so people can find me there. Our website is Ideas on Stage, so ideasonstage.com,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. These are the main two places.
Fabulous. Okay, so let's get into some of the areas we're going to talk about. I mean, the first one's quite a broad one, talking about why you feel that presentations matter.
Presentations matter because I may be biased. I am biased, of course, but I do think that public speaking, presenting is the most important skill we need right now. I'll give you an example, Richard. Warren Buffett, a few years ago, gave a lecture at Columbia University to some students, and he said, right now I'm ready to invest $100,000 on each of you for 10% of the future earnings of any of you. So if you're interested, see me after class. That's what he said. And then he added something. He said, actually, you can increase your value by 50%. So I'm going to invest $150,000 on you if you learn public speaking, if you learn effective presenting. And he wanted to make a point. And his point was that if you want to succeed in life, whatever that means for you, if you want to build a remarkable business, if you want to boost your career, if you want to increase your influence, your reputation, your profile, the best thing you can do is work on your ability to pitch, present, and communicate your ideas.
Fabulous. And what different types of presentation do you help people with? Obviously, you've talked about public speaking there. You know, the ability to speak in public is a skill. You know, a lot of people think you're born with it, but I think it's definitely a skill. Obviously, online, where through COVID, where a lot of us had to learn how to present effectively online. Which are the most important presentations you would say to start working on first?
Okay, it depends on who we are talking about. For your show, we are talking about business owners, entrepreneurs, and so it has to be business presentations. That's what we focus on, for example, at Ideas on Stage. You mentioned TEDx speakers. We have worked with more than 500 TEDx speakers over the past 13 years, but we do focus on business presentations, sales presentations. For example, with you, Richard, we worked on a presentation for prospect, which is super useful for business owners, which is a presentation that you can give, that you prepare once, you can give over and over again. Of course, you need to tweak it depending on the context, the audience, but you've got your content. And imagine if you have an opportunity every week or every other week or once per month, depending on what works for you, to be in front of a group of people, and it could be in person, it could be online, it doesn't matter. A group of people who potentially are interested in understanding whether or not there's a fit between what they may be looking for and what you have to offer. And so being able to develop a compelling presentation for prospect that encourages the audience to take the next step, which might be for them to express an interest in a follow-up conversation with you, that can be super powerful for you to be able to build a remarkable business. For example, that's what I've done for years.
Mhm.
Before COVID, for me, used to be an in-person presentation for prospect in London, in central London. Then since 2020, it's a webinar,
Mhm.
and I've been doing it once per week for years. Now I'm doing it bi-weekly, but the same principles apply.
Mhm. Let's dig into that a bit, because that is one of the questions I was going to ask, was a presentation for prospects, exactly what it is. So just can you break it down into sections for people watching, how it would work, how you'd sort of flow?
Yeah. So the flow of a presentation for prospect, the best storyline, if you want, the most effective one for a presentation for prospect is this. So first of all, the opening, which is the introduction of the presentation, which is not your introduction as the speaker, as the presenter. It's a different kind of introduction. It's something that you say to grab the audience's attention. At the beginning, you need to be able to capture the audience's attention. Once you've done that, then you can introduce yourself. And by the way, there's also, you need to be able to do that effectively, briefly and effectively. So that's the opening section of the presentation. Then you want to communicate your three key messages. And we know, if we look at how our brain works, that all of us, whether we like it or not, we find it very hard to remember more than roughly three things.
Yeah.
So it works really well if you communicate your three key messages. Of course, depending on how much time you have, then you can and you should support each of your three key messages with some supporting points. That's, for example, where you want to include stories, examples, anecdotes, analogies, something that touches the emotional part of people's brain, not just the logical part of people's brain with facts and figures. We need to have the right mix of logic and emotion. So, opening, three key messages, then you recap, so you summarize after the third key message very briefly. Then next steps, that's your call to action. What
Yeah.
do you want? You need to be very clear in terms of what you want your audience to do as a result of your presentation, and you need to tell them, and you need to be specific. We can also talk about what mistakes people make when giving a call to action during a presentation for prospects, but we do need to give a very clear and specific call to action. Then after that, Q&A, if the context allows you to do that, and why not, if it's your own event, you have an opportunity to interact with the audience. Q&A, you handle the questions. And by the way, that's another very common mistake. Many people end their presentations with the Q&A.
Right.
What confident presenters, what great presenters do is they include the Q&A, but then they finish with their punchline, with their conclusion. And for example, when we worked together, we
Yeah.
had our own, if you remember, Richard, what, so what next? You
Yeah.
want to finish with a punchline, making it very clear to your audience what was your point and why they should care about it. So to recap, we have opening, three key messages, summary, next steps or call to action, whatever we want to call it, Q&A, and then your punchline.
Perfect. And let's talk about some of those mistakes then. Let's go into the mistakes that you see people make, because obviously you work with a lot of people every year. So are they fairly common, the mistakes people make with business presentations, or?
They are common, they are predictable. And so let me give you, let's start with one. Let's start with the number one mistake, and then of course you choose which, or we can unpack everything in more detail. I can give you many other mistakes. There are quite a few, but the first one is that often, whether we are aware of it or not, business owners, business leaders end up communicating a message which is either too complex or too technical or confusing for the audience. I'll give you another example. By the way, this is the number one problem in communication, which is called the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge I see all the time with our clients. And the description of it, I found it in an amazing book that you were talking about, your book, for example, and mine. An amazing book that I read years ago, which is Made to Stick. I don't know whether you've read it, by the Heath brothers, Made to Stick, which is all about how to communicate ideas that stick in the minds of your audiences. Fantastic book. And in that book, they talk about a Stanford University study known as tappers and listeners. In 1990, a psychology student asked two groups of people to play a game. You had one group that had to tap out rhythms to famous songs on a table. These were the tappers. Think about very famous songs like Happy Birthday to You, songs like that. But instead of singing the songs, they had to tap them out on a table, the tappers. And then the other group, the listeners, they just had to try and guess what the songs were. Before the experiment started, the student asked the tappers to estimate how many songs the listeners would have guessed. Now, what do you think, Richard? On a scale, there's no right or wrong answer here, but what do you think on a scale from 0 to 100% in percentage? What do you think? How many songs do you think the tappers thought that the listeners would have guessed?
About half, I'd say around 50%.
Yeah, exactly. It was 50%. Now, in reality, what happened was just 2.5%.
Wow.
The listeners guessed just 2.5%. Massive difference. Why? going back to your question. Because if you are a tapper, you have knowledge that the listeners don't have.
Yeah. 'Cause you
If
know
you're a
the answer.
tapper, you have the songs in your head. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
for you, it's obvious what the song is, and you find it very hard to understand why the listeners can't guess them. But if you are a listener, you don't have that knowledge.
Got
You
you.
don't have the songs in your head. So for you, it's not obvious at all. If you try and play that game, then you'll say it's not obvious at all. And that's the key point. Once we know something, we find it hard to imagine what it means not knowing it.
Mm.
That's what the course of knowledge is about. It's our inability to imagine what it means not knowing what we know. And it's very easy to fall into this trap unless we gain an external perspective. And this is the number one problem I see in communication.
So simplifying the message so you get the key points across. And I know just from our experience working together, I know it was something you worked on a lot with me. Every week we'd simplify. I'd think I'd simplified and you'd simplify again. And so the slides ended up being very, very simple. But again, the message was, very clear that you were trying to, that clarity of message was really came through, didn't it?
Simple is always best.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
simplicity in, you mentioned slides, of course, but
Yeah.
also, and even before that, simplicity in your message. If there is an easy way or a hard way to explain something, let's always go for the easy way. If there's a short way or a long way to explain something, let's always go for the short way. If there's a short word, for example, or a long one to say something, let's always use the short one. Simple is always best.
Perfect. So other than simplifying the message, what other mistakes do you see? If that's number one, what's 2 and 3?
So another one is that the message we communicate is not only complex, but it's not relevant to the audience. It may be simple, but it has to be relevant to the audience.
Mm.
I'll give you another example. Some time ago, Richard, we worked with a client. Her name is Marie from Paris, from France. Marie is an executive. She's an expert in leadership, and she was invited by an association in Finland to give a talk about leadership. And she was super excited. It was one of her first international speaking opportunities. And so she prepared really well. She knew her message. She told us that she prepared 50 beautiful slides. And also, she practiced properly. So she was ready to go. She flew to Finland the day before the conference, then arrived there on the day half an hour before the audience, and because she wanted to make sure that she had time to set things up.
Yep.
And when she was about to connect her laptop to the screen, she realized that there was no screen. So, a little bit of panic, she went and asked the organizers, assuming that they would say, "Oh, sorry, Marie, now we're going to fix this for you." But what they did instead was they started laughing. They started laughing. And so she says, "Why are you laughing?" And they say, "Look, Marie, you want to show 50 slides, but actually, you've been invited to give a talk to the association in Finland of blind people."
Ah,
Blind people. Now, Richard, I know it's an extreme example. It sounds like a bad joke, but it happened for real.
yeah.
Now, Marie was very well prepared, apart from one thing:
Mhm.
she didn't know her audience.
Right.
She didn't even take the time to translate the name of the association from Finnish to French, and she would have realized that perhaps there was no need to have 50 beautiful slides. So
Mm.
for us, what does that mean? If we want to make sure, we should want to make sure that our presentations are relevant to the audience. That's the number one principle in communication. It has to
Yeah.
be relevant to the audience.
Mm.
Then, before we do anything else, before we open up PowerPoint or any other presentation tool, it doesn't make a difference. Before we think about what we want to communicate, even before that, we need to start with the audience. When we give a presentation, it's their presentation or yours. It's always the audience's presentation.
Mm. Fabulous. Lovely. Right. So let's talk a little about your book. It's something I wanted to share with everybody. So I'm just going to bring it up here. So it's out tomorrow. Is that correct?
Tomorrow, yeah. Tomorrow, absolutely, yeah. 18th of July, yeah.
And you've also, as well as people being able to buy it for 99, is it 99?
Yeah, 99p, 99 cents, depending on where people are in the world. So this is, just to clarify, it's a special offer just for tomorrow and Wednesday.
Yeah.
People can get the Kindle version of the book. So there's also a paperback version, but the offer is on the Kindle for tomorrow and the day after.
Mhm.
They can get it for 99p, 99 cents. Plus, they can also get access to 2 additional training courses with content which is not included in the book, so they can learn even more. These training courses are worth £250 and they can get them for free. So basically, book plus 2 training courses, everything for just 99p or 99 cents.
That's a great offer. So if you go to the bit.ly link at the bottom there and just put Confident Presenter Book after the bit.ly link, that'll take you through to this page here you can see on the screen, and you'll be able to sign up for that offer. It's an incredible offer.
What happens is, if people sign up, then tomorrow they will receive an email with a link for them to be able to take advantage of that offer.
Amazing. That's really good. All right, let's move on into the next questions. More things that I'm sure Andrea will be covering in detail in his book. So let's talk more about, we've seen the mistakes people make. Let's talk about the skills that you need to develop, or people watching this show want to focus on developing to become a more confident presenter.
You need to look at 3 things, 3 areas: your message, your visuals, if you need it, and your delivery. Message, visuals, and delivery. So your message is what you say during your presentation. That's the content of the presentation, which is the most important thing. Delivery, this is how you say it.
Mhm.
So these are things like eye contact, body language, gestures, voice. So it's not what you say, it's how you say it, which is not the most important thing in my view, but it's still important. We do work with this thing on these things with our clients. And then visuals, this is what you show when you say it. Now, we don't have, you mentioned your PowerPoint, for example. We don't have to use slides all the time, but often we do, and they can be useful in amplifying your message as long as we do it effectively. I often see the typical death by PowerPoint, which are with lots of text and bullet points. People can't read and listen at the same time. And there's a reason for that. Written text is processed in exactly the same part of the brain that processes the spoken text. So every time we show a slide full of text and bullet points, the audience will need to make a decision. Do I read the slide or do I listen to the presenter? It's not possible to do both things at the same time. So we need to have a compelling message. If we're using visuals, we need to do that effectively. We need to keep them simple and visual.
Yep.
And then we also need to be able to deliver the message effectively. It's a bit like a movie. Think about when you watch a movie, Richard. A movie has the screenplay, and that's the content, that's the message of the movie. A movie also has actors, and that covers the delivery side of things.
Yep.
And a movie also has special effects often. And if any of these 3 key elements is missing, most likely you won't enjoy the movie. The same is true with our presentations. If any of these 3 key elements, your message, your visuals, if you need them, and your delivery, if any of this is missing, you will find it hard to reach your objective.
Absolutely. And so which of the 3 would you say? You said you didn't think delivery was super important, but is important. Which of the 3 do you think has the most impact? Do you think it's the
message?
First
100%. Message. And that's why, for example, I chose to write the book. Because I think there's a misunderstanding, Richard. The title of the book is Confident Presenter. And I think that when people see the title, and I'm okay with that, most people will think that the book is about your delivery skills, because a lot of people think, okay, I need to take my presentation skills to a higher level. And so I need to work on my gestures, my eye contact. No. Okay, that's important, but it's not the most important thing. In my experience, 80% of your confidence comes from your ability to develop a compelling message, a message which is simple for the audience to understand, clear for them to follow and remember, original, enjoyable, a message, as we said, which is relevant to them. Without a story, that resonates with the audience. It doesn't matter how beautiful your slides are. It also doesn't matter how good you are from a delivery perspective. I wouldn't say 100%, but at least 80% of your confidence in presenting comes from your message.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to that then, because it's something I wanted to talk a bit further and dig into this compelling message, because I know you worked on it a lot with me and you had a few tips and ways of approaching this that I thought were really clever. So let's just go through some of the ways that you help people develop this compelling message.
Okay, so we can talk about many things here because you mentioned your experience when it came to simplifying your message, which is connected to the number one problem in communication that we discussed. So let's talk about how to simplify your message, which is part of creating developing a compelling message. Now, I'll give you an example. If you think about writing, now you wrote your book. All experienced writers know that the key to great writing is not in what they say; it's in what they don't say.
Yeah.
The more they remove, the better the book, or the better the article, the better the email. The same is true with your presentations. A very common mistake I see is that often we work with business owners, with business leaders. So we are talking about people who are very good at what they do. They know so much about the subject. They're also so close to it that they think that everything is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they think that they need to communicate everything. But if everything is important, then nothing is important for the audience.
Yeah.
So, for example, a practical exercise that people can do to try and simplify the message is to, for example, think about your next presentation or think about a typical presentation that you often give. Think about your core message. What's the core message behind that presentation? How can you summarize that message in maximum 70 words? That's it.
Yeah.
30 seconds. If you can do that, then you are getting closer to your ability to simplify your message. If not, your message isn't simple enough. And if you get stuck, if you don't know what to say in 70 words, then you can follow this format. Again, I want to give your listeners, Richard, a practical tools.
Yeah.
What? So what? What next?
Yeah.
So first of all, you want to tell your audience the what. What do they need to understand? What do they need to remember? What do they need to take away from your presentation? And that's important, but it's not enough. We need to go down. So what? That's the key question. So what? Why should they care? Why is your message important and relevant to them, not to you as the presenter? This is again the secret to great presenter. We can talk about it in more detail if you want. And then what next? Now that they care, now that they understand why this is important to them, what do you want them to do after your presentation? Or at the very least, what do you want them to think, to believe, to feel as a result of your presentation?
Perfect. And then you talked about the power of three earlier. Is that part of your compelling message, simplifying it into those three areas? Understanding.
Definitely. So what the method we use when we work with our clients, we call it presentation score. You want to score with your presentations like in football, and score stands for 5 principles: simple, clear, original, related to the audience, and enjoyable. So simple, we talked about it. Clear, so it's not the only thing, but the idea is that you need to be able to create a clear storyline. We discussed it with the presentation for prospects from the very beginning to the very end. The core of your presentation, it doesn't have to be like that all the time, but it works really well, very effective if you include your 3 key messages. That's the rule of 3.
Yeah.
3 is the most persuasive number in communication. We see if we pay attention, we see all the time in communication. Now, for example, if you think about fairy tales, we have things like the 3 musketeers, the 3 little pigs. It's not the 4 musketeers, it was 3 of them. You have in politics You've got famous slogans like in France, my French is super bad, but so my accent will be bad, but liberté, égalité, fraternité. So it's three things. In the US, they have something similar: life, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. It's
Yeah.
always in three parts. During COVID, for example, in the UK, most of the messages from the government were structured into threes: hands, space. What was it? Hands, space, hands, face, space, or
Stay at home.
but even that, stay at home,
Yeah.
protect the NHS,
Yeah.
save lives.
Save lives.
So the power of three, this is the rule of three. It's one of the simplest and most powerful principles in communication. What that means for us is that, for example, you could communicate your three key messages, or even within your key messages as part of your presentation, you could have lists of three. So you talk about your product, your service. Now, these are the three key reasons why our service can help you. So this is not the 9 reasons why. These are the 3 reasons why. These are the 3 key features of our solution, or these are the 3 key benefits of our solution. So it's always possible to structure your thinking, which helps you and your audience as well. If we don't do that, if we don't pay attention to the way we structure our presentations, we are making it hard for the audience to follow us, remember what we say, and do something and take action. And if that's the objective, and often for business owners, that's the objective,
Yeah.
then that's why that's important.
And we talked a lot about analogies as well. Just explain a little bit about using analogies in a presentation, because I found it really interesting how you use them.
Yeah, analogies are super powerful in communication. It's one of the communication devices you would use, going back to the SCORE method, to make your content, your message more original and enjoyable. An analogy is a comparison between two things. So when you say this is a bit like that, A is a bit like B, that's an analogy. It's a comparison between two things.
Absolutely.
So especially when you have a concept that you want to get across, which is complex or technical or simply new to the audience, then if you can connect that, your idea, to something that the audience already knows and understand, when you make that connection, that's when learning happens. For example, some time ago, I watched an interview where, I don't know if you know Neil deGrasse Tyson in the US. Is an astrophysicist and is one of the best, for me, the best science communicators out there at the moment. And one of the reasons why that's the case is because he uses analogies all the time and is able to communicate complex stuff. We're talking about astrophysics in a simple way. And he was answering some questions from the audience. And one of the questions was, Mr. Tyson, what do you think about life in the universe beyond planet Earth? And he thinks, based on his expertise, that the chances that there is life in the universe, he thinks that the chances are very high. But instead of using complex or scientific language that for that particular audience would have not worked, again, it depends on the audience, he used an analogy. And I still remember the analogy. He said, imagine that you are in the ocean, it's just you are on a small boat, you are in the ocean, and then you have a glass with you, and you take some water from the ocean with your glass, and then you look at the glass and you say, okay, there are no whales in this glass, therefore I can assume that there are no whales in the entire ocean, which doesn't really make sense, right? And he says, if you make the assumption, it's like making the assumption that just because we don't see life beyond us, then we are saying that there is no life in the universe.
Absolutely, yeah.
And everybody can get the idea of being on a small boat in the ocean. So when you connect something that the audience is not yet familiar with to something that everybody understands, that's where learning happens. And what happens is there is an effect that we experts call it the anchoring effect. So the audience will subconsciously will think, okay, if this is true, that's the analogy, the comparison you made. If this is true, then what Richard is telling me about how to make my business remarkable must also be true.
Exactly. Perfect. Love it. Okay. Anything else on compelling messages, Andrea? Well, we've got you in the.
Yeah. So we talked about making it relevant.
Mhm.
And to do that, for example, a very practical tool is to start with the ABC of preparation. So before PowerPoint, before your message, start with the audience. ABC stands for audience, burning needs, and context. So
Yep.
take some time and ask yourselves some questions about the audience. Who are they? Their burning needs. What do they really need? What do they expect from your presentation?
Mhm.
And then the context. For example, is it one to one? Is it one to many? How many? Is it in person? Is it online? If it's online, what tool are you going to use? How are you going to use it? How and when are you planning to interact with the audience? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that if you don't do that, then you can't create a great presentation. But the risk is that you develop a fantastic presentation, a compelling message, which is not relevant to the audience. And that's why we need to start with them. And these are the main things. We haven't talked about yet about storytelling, the power of stories, but that together with analogies, it's another way to make your content more original and enjoyable.
And relatable. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Perfect. Because you did mention about online, and my last question that we wanted to dig into was really the difference between in-person and online presentations. And again, just going back to working with you, I know we had a slightly different approach to the two different formats, and you were quite clear that this is what we do online. However, if it was in person, we'd adapt that slightly. So just explain a little to the audience some of the adaptations you'd make between the two formats.
Yeah, so let me start with one practical thing I remember we did with you, and then I can give you the bigger picture. If I remember well, Rita, because that was a few months ago, but one of the differences was that in an in-person presentation with our clients, we always encourage them to use black slides, which is something that not many people do. And a black slide is the most powerful slide you can use in person, because every time you show a black slide, so you've got a slide, and then if you don't have something on the screen which is connected to what you are saying, then you can include a black slide,
Yeah.
and then you continue with another slide afterwards. And every time you show a black slide, it works like magic. You can see that the audience people pay attention to you, what you have to say.
Yeah.
But then if you use a black slide online, it doesn't work. People will think that there is a technical glitch. So the equivalent of using a black slide online is to simply stop sharing your screen. We don't have to share a screen all the time. So we have some slides, and then sometimes we stop sharing. People can focus on us, and then if we need to share again, we can do that. So that's a very small thing, a technical thing that I think we've done with you, Richard.
Did, yeah.
But then the bigger picture is this: in terms of your ability to develop a compelling message, the same principles apply, but there are some key differences. One is technology, the setup. Now, in person, technology doesn't make a huge difference, apart from making sure that the screen works, that your slides work. That you need to do that, but that's the only thing, more or less.
Yeah.
Unless we are talking about like special effects, big conferences, but in most cases, for small business owners, technology doesn't make a huge difference in person. Online, it does for obvious reasons. So even like in an interview, in a live show like this,
Mhm.
we need to pay attention to things. Before going live, we were talking about lighting, and you ideally you want to have a microphone, a professional microphone, a webcam,
Yeah.
things like that, a background which at the very least not distracting for the audience. So technology, the setup is more important online. Another difference is the level of interaction that you want to have, that you need to have with the audience. Again, the principle is the same, but the way you apply is different. Now, interaction is super important. If you think about your audience's attention, it's a bit like the sand in an hourglass. Now, the sand in an hourglass runs out after a few minutes, but it's very easy to just flip you over and start again. When you are presenting, it's the same thing. Your audience's attention is like that. You can flip you over and start again, which
Yeah.
means that it's not up to the audience to work hard to pay attention. It's up to you as the presenter. to work hard, to gain their attention, and to keep it high. And the best way to do that is to include moments of interaction. It could be as simple as asking some questions from time to time. There are many possibilities. You can keep it simple, but you want to include moments of interaction. So you want to go from what most people do, one-way communication,
Yeah.
to a designed conversation.
Mhm.
And the key word is designed, which means that for the audience, it feels like a conversation, but for you presenting, you've designed those conversational elements in advance. Now, the difference there is that if you are presenting in person, that you want to include moments of interaction after about every 10 minutes or so, because the audience's attention drops after about 10 minutes. If you are online, it's even harder to keep the audience's attention high. And so you want to include moments of interaction every 3 to 5 minutes, which again is not what most people do.
Mhm.
And then I'll give you one other difference, which covers the delivery side of things. Again, same principles apply. The way we apply them is different. One delivery technique is eye contact. We want to make good eye contact with the audience, and the reason why that's important is because it's one way for you to build a good connection with the audience. Now, the way you make eye contact in an in-person presentation is different from the way you make eye contact online. Online, what do we want to do? We just want to look at the camera rather than, for example, now I'm not. Now I'm looking at the question. What is the difference between in-person? Or now I'm looking at you, Richard, on the screen. What we
Yeah.
need to do is we need to train ourselves, even if it's uncomfortable at first, to look at the camera because that's where our audience is. So to recap, three key differences: technology, the level of interaction, and the way we apply some techniques, particularly from a delivery perspective, like, for example, eye contact.
Mm. And I think the points of interaction are very key. You see, I like Daniel Priestley. If you go on any of his calls, you can see he always interacts with the audience, doesn't he? At key points, very good at that, even when you're right on
Every
the call.
yeah, every time the audience does something, and then as a speaker you can invite them to do something. It could be as simple as typing something in the chat, but if they do that, it means that they are there with you, they're listening to you, and they're not doing something else, and that's why it's important.
Fabulous. Right, so we've got to the end of the questions that people have sent in and some of the questions that we wanted to talk about in the show. Is there any last points that you can leave people with, Andrea, just to really help them just become this confident presenter you want them all to be?
Here is my final message. If there's one thing I would like our listeners to take away from this conversation, is that if you want to take your presentation skills to a higher level, then focus on the things that don't change. Jeff Bezos says that he's often asked, what do you think is going to change in the next 10 years? And he says, nobody ever asked me, what do you think is not going to change in the next 10 years? And he thinks that the second question is much more useful because if he says if you focus on the things that don't change, you will be successful. In the case of Amazon, for example, they know that 10 years from now, people will still want fast delivery, low prices, and a big selection. So
Yeah.
if they keep focusing on those things, they will be successful.
Mhm.
When it comes to presenting, public speaking, communication in general, there are things that change and things that don't change. The things that change are tools and technology. Like, for example, 50 years ago, we didn't have PowerPoint. A few years ago, we didn't have Zoom, or what are we using today? StreamYard. Uh,
StreamYard, yeah.
a few months ago, we didn't have ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So tools will change. That's inevitable. But then there are things that don't change. And these are the fundamental principles of communication. Remember, simple, clear, original, relevant, related, enjoyable. Aristotle was the first one more than 2000 years ago who gave us some building blocks of persuasion and influencing and communication in general, and he didn't have those tools. So for example, in your case, Richard, you, as part of your business and your role, you give presentations, you speak in public. Think about it. Let's say that 10 years from now you give a presentation, and then somebody comes to you after your presentation and they say, Richard, that was a great presentation. I just wish that your message was not so simple for me to understand. That will never happen.
They'll never
Or I
say.
just wish that your presentation was not so clear for me to follow and remember, or that it wasn't so original and enjoyable. Or Richard, great presentation. I just wish that your message was not so relevant to me and my needs. That will never happen. And
Yeah.
it will never happen because these are the fundamental principles of communication. Of course, and I'll close here. You do want to pay attention to what's going on from a technological perspective, because if we do it well, technology can help us get a message across even better.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
But what really makes a difference are whether or not we follow the fundamental principles. So if you want to take your skills to a higher level, focus on the things that don't change.
Perfect. Love that. And a final plug for the book, because it's out tomorrow. So we've got to get you as many copies in people's hands. And I just think, having worked with you, just from, again, your answers to the questions this evening has just underlined why it's just such an important skill to develop. So make sure you check out Andrea's book. Take advantage of that special offer that he's put up there. That £250 worth of free training videos has to be worth taking advantage of. So bit.ly/confident presenter book. Go and see that and let everybody know. Connect with Andrea on LinkedIn and let him know what you think of the book. All right, Andrea, thank you for your time. Really appreciate your time this week. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Okay, hopefully that was really interesting for you. Again, remarkable communication, remarkable presentation skills. It's all part of building a remarkable business. As I say, the better you are at communicating, and I think Andrea summed it up there by saying having that compelling message that is clearly communicated is just the core of having a remarkable business, and it will just help your business grow and grow. Now, the next show, we're skipping August, we're away for August, but we'll be back on the 11th of September. So that's Monday, the 11th of September at 6 o'clock. So I look forward to seeing you in September. Have a great summer, and I'll talk to you all then. Take care. Bye now.